What's up guys, it's Bo here again, and welcome to another Bo Gingerin vlog. How you all doing? In this entry I'd like to talk about a fairly recent realization of mine. Although it's not too recent, it's something that I discovered maybe like a month ago. Right, and I've kind of been alluding to it in older entries, right? And basically it is something that I feel that I have some capacity to talk about, right? Because what I discovered for myself, right, in terms of what is my purpose here, right, is that I discovered that I was a particular type of of person, you could say. Like, I have a particular type of purpose that I was put on earth to do, right? And that essentially forms the gist of the realization I had a month ago. Right, it was actually following a holiday I took where I went to Japan, and I also went to Hong Kong, which is where I'm ethnically from, right? And coming back from there, like, I discovered a part of myself. I found an ownership, like a feeling of ownership for a part of myself that I had always kind of been conflicted about, right? And so what I discovered is that I am a healer type, right? And the healer type is, you know, also called the light worker, right? You know, but even that term light worker has many different, in my opinion anyway, like many different roles that could constitute, right? In my opinion, the word light worker points more towards the motivation, or rather the motivation. It points more towards the motivation than it does the specific role, right? Like I say, there are many roles that constitutes, you know, the collective label of light worker, right? But like specifically, I discovered that I myself am a healer type, right? There's also a book called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, right? Which, despite that book focusing, you know, more specifically on like masculinity, right? Still it is apt in describing the type that I am, right? And so another word you can use is lover, right, for this, right? In among those four archetypes of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, I would be the lover, right? And so this entry I want to dedicate talking along the lines of what is a, like, we're just kind of giving my take on what it is to be a healer, you know, what it involves, and really just reaching out to anyone who might be watching this who might also have a similar inclination within themselves, who hasn't yet found the articulation or the feeling of ownership in terms of this, right? You know, for all those healers out there, this is my message for you, right? Because the thing about the healer or the lover, you know, is there's there's kind of a clandestine, maybe, I don't know if that's the right word, but like a clandestine understanding, you know, that within society, that like the lover archetype or the healer type, right, is not quite respected as much as the other types in society, right? Because we just happen to live in a society that is very focused on, you know, on on very masculine, traditionally masculine attributes, right? That is what our society lauds as desirable in society. Like in society, you're only someone in society if you're successful, if you're dominant, if you're aggressive, if you are tough, emotionally resilient, all of that stuff, right? And this is the interesting thing, right? Because for me, obviously being a healer, right, I have disowned, or rather I have found it difficult to fully own that kind of inner spark of healer within me, because that is what society, that's the kind of message that society gives you. Is that like if you possess the inclination towards being a healer, society tells you that you're weak, right? Society tells you that you are not respected. You are not respectable. It doesn't even. It's not very. Well, I mean that would be a euphemism. Like it almost has disdain towards those who heal, right? Those who have that healer essence within them, right? It treats healing as if it is this thing that can be tossed aside, doesn't mean anything, symbolizes weakness, right? All of the traits that make up the healer archetype, or, the healer type, typically is kind of, like I say, clandestinely viewed. And by clandestine I mean it's not vocalized, but the kind of feeling that you get as a healer is that you're just weak, you're a waste of space, you're a weirdo, all of these things, right? And yet, the funny thing is, right, that the world now, in my estimation, this could be argued, but, excuse me, in my estimation, I believe that healers are one of the most desperately needed people out there, right? And I've done a lot of talking, but I haven't really explained or described what a healer does, what a healer looks like. And, and therein lies the reason why I think healers are the most required type of personality, or type of person that is needed in today's society, right? So a healer is, put simply, a person who resonates with love, basically, right? So when I talk about roles, right, there is this disconnect between roles in their function and also their kind of surface appearance, right? So I also talk about this concept that I coined called the axis of perception, where you have a vertical axis and you have a horizontal axis, right? Where the horizontal axis is symbolic, right? That deals with things that you see, labels, names, symbolism, basically, how we make sense of the world in a mechanical fashion, right? But there is also another axis which is horizontal, which is orthogonal to this, meaning that it is not necessarily affixed to any symbolism that we may use to point towards something, right? And this axis, which is rather more elusive, it's a bit more difficult to talk about, to pin down, is the energetic axis, the identity axis, the morality axis, the axis that deals with meaning, right, in context. But anyway, so what you do, the actions that you involve yourself in symbolically are not necessarily indicative of your type, right? So to give an example, right? So like I say, the healer type is the type that resonates with love, right? And that obviously also, you can extend that to mean someone who resonates with love for the sake of themselves, but also for the sake of other people, right? You know, what does it mean when we say to heal ourselves and to heal other people? It means to resonate and entrain with the energy of love, right? The energy of love, which then leads to innocence, it leads to joy. You could say that love, in this sense, is the, you know, is the movement towards positivity. You know, if we were to define positivity as things that make us feel good, you know, as subjective and as vague as that statement sounds, you know, it's connecting with the things that really that make you feel good, you know, that make you feel loving, that make you feel emotional, but in a good way. You know, it's really simple. You know, it's like you listen to that song that makes you feel like there's a meaning to everything, that that you are safe, or that like there is beauty in the world, right? You know, beauty is another important part of the healer's work, which is, and therefore the energy of love, right? So it is to see beauty, and that is what the healer does, right? The healer, again, is a role, right? It is an identity, you could say, you know, using that word to relate to the axis of perception, where the healer is a role, is an identity, but and the healer does not necessarily. The healer can then be applied to any job or any you know, any kind of title. You know, any title. Like, for example, right, a healer could be a musician, right? A healer could be a writer. A healer could be an artist, right? But then a healer can also be in the medical industry, the medical profession, right? A healer could be in education, right? A healer could be in the culinary profession or industry, you know, cuisine, right? Catering. The healer could be in a cleaning job, you know. It doesn't really matter what the job is, or like what is the thing that they do, like on a practical level. That, you know, the healer does the thing in order to fulfill his role of entraining with love, right? So, you know, similarly, right, you know, like the flip side of this is that, like, just because there's a title, a job title, that typically is seen as something that a healer would do, right, does not necessarily mean that, you know, someone in that profession is necessarily a healer, right? So someone who is a musician, for example, may not actually be a healer, right? You know, and there are similar roles to healers, right? You know, like such as, well, you could argue that this is part of it, but like, you know, well, no, I was thinking that, you know, like there are some musicians, for example, who sing to express pain, which is really essentially the same thing. So I'm just kind of thinking it through myself, but like, you know, like you have, there are loads of musicians out there who do it for like self-gratification, you know, who do it because they want to be famous, or because they want to prove something to themselves, right? You know, there are actually some, you know, musicians out there, some artists out there who are actually, like, if we take, you know, the convenient labels of king, warrior, magician, lover, like those masculine archetypes, right? You know, there are some artists who are warriors in the sense that, like, they want to be they want to prove to themselves that it's possible, you know. There are some musicians who are magicians in the sense that, like, they want to become technically brilliant, at their craft, and it's the curiosity and interest towards mastering their craft that what drives them, right? And that type of musician has a very has a very distinctive quality to their music, right? Or art, indeed, right? King, not so much. King is kind of a bit separate, right? I don't know. You could argue that there are some musicians who make music just to gather attention, and it's not necessarily in a narcissistic light, although it can be. It can be like some people just they want to make music to bring people together. Let's just say, to unite people. So each of those archetypes, each of those types has they're all musicians or artists, right? But the music or the art that they create has a distinctive quality to it that is distinct from each all other archetypes, right? And so the healer type is the type that entrains with love, right? The one that makes art in order to touch people. That is my reason for making art, right? It's funny because I went to a music school, right? And this kind of conversation was never had, right? That chalk it up to my own kind of immaturity, I guess. But it's also something that is, perhaps, it's something to do with the school I went to and everything, but it wasn't a conversation that was had, why are you in it to make music? Yes, you want to make music. Yes, you want to, all of these courses that we're doing are, are making us better, technically, in terms of being musicians and also business people, right? In the creative field. No one really talks about the philosophical reasons. I don't really like that word in this context, but the kind of motivational reasons for doing music, the motivational aspect of it, right? So why are you making music? Are you trying to prove something? Are you trying to reach mastery, or are you doing it to make people feel something, to touch them, right? Or to inspire them, right? And the thing is, we're not these types aren't mutually exclusive, right? Within every person there are aspects of each of these archetypes, or any types that you find, in whatever, psychology tests, personality tests. These all exist within us, but the thing is that we have a dominant expression. We have one that is dominant, that really forms the basis of our primary function in the world, right? And so I discovered mine to be a healer, right? And that has given me so much clarity over what I do, right? Because it depends what kind of person you are, really. But some people do it the reverse way from how I do it. To be fair, my way is a bit kind of unusual in society, but there are some people who they become masters at what they do before they then realize that and then they kind of slide into their role, their type. But in my case, I have discovered my role prior to achieving mastery or being renowned in any practical physical field. And generally that's how I work, I need to understand, or rather I get to the big picture first before I before I then forge, right? But some other people, they forge and then they stumble upon, without knowing it, they stumble upon their type or their role, right? And so really, my message in this entry is just to get, or rather, what my intent is to get you to think about, what is my role? What is the dominant motivation behind why I do whatever it is I do, right? And you can use tools such as King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, or I don't know, like a funny example, you know, an interesting example is like video games, right? You know, for example, like Final Fantasy, they have like job classes, right, in games, right, and you know, and like you can use, you know, something like that, for example, to like kind of think about like what it is that you like. What is the effect of what you want, of that you want, coming from what you do? Right? What is the intended effect that you want to have on people, on society, right? And once you discover that, you will discover that motivation, right? Because like a lot of people like talk about the mechanics, or like the yeah, the mechanics of what they want to do, and they talk in terms of things like talent and proficiency, you know, that kind of thing. Where it's like, you know, I have a propensity towards this thing, you know, I have talent in this area, you know, I have the ability to do this thing. But like no one really talks about motivation in this way, right? And role and I feel that type, or at least in discovering my type and discovering types in general, like, you know, is really about like finding the motivation to do something, right? Because motivation and talent are equally important, you know. I use the word talent, but like it's also like skill, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, you know, like this was just my discovery and my thoughts surrounding this, right? And yeah, you know, like although I am predominantly a healer, like, you know, again, this goes back to the point of like, well, yeah, you know, this entry is, I guess, kind of dedicated to the healer types, right? And I'll kind of wrap up with a bit of a, you know, a thing like a bit of a motivational thing for all of you healers out there. But you know, I'm also discovering the warrior side in me, I guess. You know, going back to those four archetypes, is like I mentioned in, you know, my earlier entries, like particularly like the beginning of this year, like this year I've been really wrestling with my own darkness, I guess you could say, like with life, you know, like I've been really kind of wrestling with the nitty gritty of life, you know, like yeah, and so like, you know, I've been discovering other sides to myself, right? But like the thing about when you discover your dominant type is like that is your primary motivation towards the things you towards your life, essentially. You know, how you live your life can then be based around this one thing, right? Or rather, like it, you know, it gives you a very kind of like it gives you the direction to move in, right? You know, it gives you kind of like a northern star, if you will, that you can then follow, right? But anyway, I'll kind of wrap up with a bit of, because like this entry has been about healing, but it's also just been like a general description about like types and motivation, things like that. Bit of recapping as well, but like, you know, the healer type is easily overwhelmed. You know, I'm sure like if you're a healer type, or if you're someone who feels that kind of inclination towards healing, then you probably feel this, right? You know, because the healer is sensitive. You know, sensitivity, emotional, energetic sensitivity is the healer's, you know, blessing and curse, right? You know, the healer gets run over a lot in life. You know, like I first discovered my healer tendencies back when I was like in my teens, like when I was 16, 17. And I'd completely forgotten about this, but like my recent discovery, like, or my recent kind of like full circle, like coming full circle to rediscover my healing capacity, like I remembered like the point at which, like the first inkling of like what I could do, like my motivation in life was when I was in my teens, like it was about 10 years ago. And I discovered it through media, right? You know, like I'd always loved media, and a specific type of media, like the kind of media, like, you know, games, or like you know, like movies, films, cartoons, though, you know, but specifically the ones that made me feel like tender inside, the things that had like uplifting and like beautiful and like almost like tear wrenching. Wait, is that the right word? Tear jerking, not it's gut wrenching, tear jerking, like almost like jerking like responses out of me, and I really love that, right? But then like as I got older, you know, like it's like society doesn't give a shit, like if you're a healer essentially, you know, and it steamrolls you, and like you spend the next few years, you know, a number of years just like trying to reject that side of you and trying to like move as far away from it as possible, right? And you become someone who is stronger, you know, like again, this journey that I've been on for these past few years has started by me just realizing that I'm weak, and that like I can't be weak, you know, because it means anything really, you know. It means I'm a failure. It means I'll never be happy. And so like as I was still pushing away from like my healer kind of tendencies, my healer role, my healer identity, you know, I started to become stronger, you know. I started to develop in the areas that I typically was shit at, you know, like organization and like willpower and assertiveness, and just being strong, you know, being masculine. You know, because of my healer tendencies, I never viewed myself as masculine. You know, like the message I got in school was that I was a pussy, you know, that I was too nice, that I was a doormat, you know, all of these things, right? And so I pushed away from that, and I became stronger. Like, I mean, I could just sit here and talk about like the journey I've been on, but like in essence, like I pushed away once I discovered it, and then I discovered that like the world doesn't care for healers, or at least that was the message I got at the time. I pushed away from it, and then I started to develop in the areas that I thought I should then develop in, you know. In university, I learned how to be cool, you know. I learned how to be like glib almost, like, you know. I learned how to like charm people in conversation. So I learned how to like small talk. I learned how to like be entertaining. You know, I learned how to make people laugh, you know, that kind of thing. And then like after university, when I was out in the real world, I had to learn how to be organized. I had to learn how to like follow instructions. I had to learn how to be careful, because before that I was like careless as shit, man. Like I was just like so carefree and like and laid back and careless. But I had to learn how to be reliable. You know, I had to learn how to be strong. I had to learn how to be resilient, right? And then you know, then I started on my spiritual stuff, and like I then developed my ideas, you know, instead of like just being someone who was just like nice and but didn't really think for himself, you know. I then developed and discovered, you know, an amazing side of me that is able to like think, to perceive clearly, you know, like the truth of things, right? And to be able to like stand on my own 2 feet intellectually, right? So I discovered that, and then finally, you know, the full circle was completed when this March, or the end of, yeah, you know, this March, I rediscovered who I was. You know, the first kind of glimpse of hope that I had in my life was when I discovered that I was a healer, right? And that's ultimately the thing that I want to give to people, right? It's not the only thing, but it's like the main thing, right? So if you're a healer out there, I just want you to know I love you. You know, I love you. You know, that's all I want to say. You know, I love you. I love me. I love everyone, and that's why I do the things I do, right? Because I love. You know, no matter what goes, no matter what happens in life, you know, no matter what path you get forced down sometimes, as long as you remember that love is the reason why you're here, you'll be fine. You know, sure, like sometimes you'll forget that, and that's kind of part of the terrifying thing about life, but also the you know, the kind of pristine, like divinely beautiful thing in life is that you get to lose that and to experience the complete opposite, you know, a lack of love, you know, hate, you know, like self-loathing and stuff like that. But then when you come back to love, you're like, it becomes all the more sweeter, and you remember that you are love, and that is the reason why you're here, right? And so, you know, I'm not going to provide to you any kind of like, you know, direct advice or anything like that. You know, I could say, you know, be strong, you know, keep going, but like, the only thing I should say is I love you. Love is who we are. You know, like, as a healer, no matter how hard you push away from it, like, no matter how bad you can become, like, no matter how twisted you could become, because it's like, the thing about a healer is, like, you know, like I mentioned, like, energetic sensitivity is our blessing and our curse, right? Because we're so sensitive, because we're so receptive and malleable, right? Because we're so affected by people, by our environment. You know, sometimes like we can experience these really lofty like you know, like feelings of love, like, you know, like, just like, it's indescribable. You just love everything. You know, you realize that, like, no matter how how bad or like immoral things are or someone is, you can still love them, and it moves you to tears, right? But then there are other times when you're kind of mired in darkness, and like you have like really dark thoughts, right? But at the end of the day, you go back to love. Not because you did anything, not because you focused in a specific way, you know, in some kind of conscious way. No, it's because that's who you are, right? You know, I am a healer. I am a lover. I don't have a choice in that. It's who I am, right? And if you are too, don't worry, because that's who you are. No matter what happens, as long as you stay you, you're going to be a healer, right? That's just who you are. That's your nature, right? So cool. I hope that gave you a bit of perspective. It was a very important realization for me, and yeah, and I will definitely move forwards, you know, in accordance with that, right? And I hope that if you're a healer, you will do so too. So cool. Hope that was helpful and insightful. I will catch you guys in the next entry. Peace out.